Great. Thank you, Roshni. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for choosing to join us today. We know your time is valuable and we appreciate you spending it with us. I'm Brenda Lammy, Vice President of Professional Leadership Development at the College. To begin, we respectfully acknowledge that we're broadcasting today from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We recognize Indigenous, Métis, and the Inuit intergenerational and traditional cultures of knowledge sharing, understanding we have a lot to learn and hope that it is in that spirit that you join us today. As many of us are experiencing the second wave of the pandemic, we'd like to thank all the dedicated college members, health workers, industry partners, and leaders who are working diligently to manage and lead through the COVID-19 pandemic. The webinar today is particularly well-timed given what is going on with regards to vaccines in Canada, and I particularly appreciate the presenters' time today during this very busy time they're experiencing. Now, onto the webinar. Innovative Medicines Canada is the national voice of Canada's innovative pharmaceutical industry and has been a corporate member of CCHL since 2005, and we're very pleased to be partnering with them to offer today's webinar. Today's speakers include Pamela Freilich, President of Innovative Medicines Canada. Pamela works with Canada's research-based pharmaceutical companies to ensure that all Canadians have access to medicines they need when they need them, and that Canada remains an attractive place to invest in life sciences. And Dr. Dion Neem is the Country Medical Lead for Sanofi Canada and Country Medical Head for Pasteur, the vaccine arm of Sanofi. He's also a pediatrician working in pediatric urgent care clinics in Southwestern Ontario. So the presenters would like to start today's session with two questions. We're going to be doing a poll. So please enter your responses to the first question now, and I'll ask Roshni to pop up that first question. There it is. So how much do you feel you know about the innovative medicines industry and its response to COVID-19? We'll give you a few seconds here to enter your response. And there we have it. And now, thank you. So I don't know very much. So that seemed to be the predominant answer. Hopefully that changes towards the end. The second question, thank you, Roshni. How would you rate your knowledge on COVID-19 candidate vaccines? And responses. So a little bit more confidence with the vaccine knowledge. So that's great, but there's still room for improvement. Okay, and it's my pleasure now that I turn the presentation over to Pamela. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Brenda. Good morning, good noon, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. And merci beaucoup pour l'invitation today. It's just so wonderful to be here and have a chance to connect with what I think may be some of my former colleagues wearing different hats. I wanted to start off my comments, as you did, Brenda, just really a tip of my hat to all CCHL members. These challenging times, the unprecedented word we keep using, but that applies to the effort that you're all making. You must be exhausted, you're the people you work with, and we're just so grateful for the work that you are doing. I would say that this collaboration will be the theme from my comments, and it's never been more critical. You see it sort of showing its evidence in the development of vaccines and treatments in a time frame that we never could have imagined, frankly, a year ago. But you'll see the collaboration taking place within industry, so-called competitors, which is a little unprecedented, across industry, governments, academia, philanthropic bodies. It truly is all hands on deck. And as I say, a theme of my comments today. I did want to just add a comment. I don't like to shy away from the fact that tensions exist between a for-profit industry and many health system stakeholders, including governments. So add to that sort of normal, if you will, tension, the heightened tension when the industry is in a life-saving or life-transforming health world. And then just for fun, let's add the complexity, the mystery of an industry that's generally not well known or understood. And the poll we just conducted really showed evidence of that. That being said, and we may not always agree on a variety of matters, but we all have a common objective, and that is to help Canadians become and stay healthy. That's what's driving all of us. So, despite those factors and that inherent trust challenges that can result, in the face of a global threat, we've all been putting the tensions aside and working for the good of all Canadians. I think rarely has the importance of this particular industry been so evident. We don't always know what's going on behind the scenes, but it has become more and more upfront and central to our day-to-day living. So I'm really quite proud to have been and to be part of this work. And just want to thank all of you, all of our stakeholders, for the collaborative spirit at this time of tremendous national need. So for today, I'd like to just comment on three themes. The Canadian industry in action, as I call it, some of the unprecedented collaborations that you may not have heard about, and I think are quite fascinating. You want to find out more about those. And then I'll finish up with a so what, now what commentary. And I'm going to look forward to your thoughts on how our presentations can contribute to your own leadership development using your LEADS framework. I'd suggest maybe the D, developing coalitions, or the S, for system transformation, will become apparent, but I'll leave some of that interpretation up to you. So for theme one, to give you a sense of what this Canadian industry has been doing during COVID-19, I'll start with a bit of very brief background information. Who are we? IMC, Innovative Medicines Canada, represents 43 companies from the innovative medicines and life sciences sectors. We represent over $19 billion annually in economic activity. We support more than 30,000 high-value jobs across the Canadian economy. And we do place 10% of our patented product revenues directly into research and development. And as you might imagine, the objective of all of this business is to accelerate the discovery, the development, the manufacture, the delivery of treatments, diagnostics, and perhaps most importantly these days, vaccines. In Canada, there are anywhere from around 400 products, I would say, at any given time under development in Canada. These are all therapies that I'm talking about here. They treat cancer, infectious diseases, and of course, vaccines. And these products are researched and produced here, but not just for Canadians, but people all over the world. And just a little bit of a factoid for those who like to pick up pieces of information. The World Health Organization tells us that vaccines alone prevent 2 to 3 million deaths every year. They save millions more from developing long-term health complications from diseases like polio, measles, and whooping cough. So we may not think about vaccines on a day-to-day basis unless we're in the middle of a pandemic, but the benefit to the health of the global citizenry is immense. So during this pandemic, IMC members have been collaborating almost daily, I would say, with federal, provincial, municipal governments. We've been meeting weekly with our sister organizations to share perspectives and learnings and make sure we're looking after drug supply as an example. So we meet with the Generics Association, we meet with the distributors, neighborhood pharmacies, the Canadian Pharmacists Association. So we've been meeting literally on a weekly basis. It's now about every 2 weeks, but making sure that we're keeping each other as informed as possible. The member companies of IMC are involved in multiple initiatives around COVID-19, but on top of all the global pieces of research and support programs that are put in place, they contributed to a very specific IMC COVID-19 fund. And from that fund, we were able to contribute N95 masks to the Public Health Agency of Canada. These were in the early days where it was so difficult to source them. Another 200,000 surgical masks we were able to source for pharmacists through the Canadian Pharmacists Association. But the bulk of the money went to creating a new research chair in pandemic preparedness. So this is a future-oriented health systems approach to dealing with pandemic. And it was awarded to Dr. Srinivas Smriti of UBC and BC Children's Hospital. But on top of that special COVID fund, the members were also providing compassionate support for access to medication. Any Canadians that might have lost their drug benefits as a result of their COVID-related job loss could rely on the companies to provide them. Our companies as well provided paid leave to many of their employees who are physicians, nurses, other health practitioners, and they were allowed to go and volunteer on the front line, so to speak, especially in long-term care facilities, while the company continued their salary. So there was no cost to the public health system. So those are a few examples, at least of what the Canadian industry has been doing. But I want to hone in on my second theme on the collaborative side itself. We keep throwing this word around unprecedented, but it is a legitimate use of the word in the environment we find ourselves. So without going through all of the examples, just in Canada alone, we have Eli Lilly. They're partnering with a Vancouver-based biotech company, AbCellera. They're looking at, they're doing the analysis of blood samples from patients who have recovered from COVID-19 to try to isolate antibodies that can be used for treatments and prevention. I'm sure you've heard about this and perhaps are involved in some way. We have, well, I won't talk about Sanofi because Dr. Neem is going to do that, I'm quite sure. We have Amgen working with adaptive biotechnologies, looking at using their expertise to discover, develop fully human neutralizing antibodies that are targeting COVID-19 to help in the prevention or even the treatment of that particular disease. We have Quebec's Medicago, which is a homegrown great story, if you will. They managed to identify a candidate vaccine within 20 days of getting the virus to study. They're well along in their work, and they're working with GSK and Dynavax. We've had our member companies sharing their libraries of molecular compounds with the global scientific community to allow for more coordinated study. And that's really how we've managed to advance the work on the vaccines to a great extent, that having open books on what various players in this world have been doing. So I won't go on again in great detail, but you can check out our website at innovativemedicines.ca and see many, many more examples. And one of the great outcomes of all of this collaboration, not just in Canada, but internationally, is certainly the agreements that the Canadian government has been able to make with 7 Canadian companies that are going to supply over 500 million doses of the most promising vaccines to Canadians. So I'll leave that for Dr. Neem to update us on. I know he's got some good information. Just a last point on the internet or the collaboration side and how unprecedented it is. I wanted to mention a couple of initiatives on the international level. Again, if you've not heard about these, you'll want to do a little bit more research afterwards or maybe in the Q&A. But the WHO, the World Health Organization, created the ACT, A-C-T, it's the Accessing COVID-19 Tools Accelerator. Industry is a founding partner, which is, I'd like to say unique, but certainly almost unheard of in being invited by the World Health Organization to be a partner in an initiative of this nature. And it's all about speeding access, but also equitable global access to safe, quality, effective, affordable vaccines. There's the COVAX facility that comes out of WHO. It's a pillar of the ACT-A initiative I just mentioned. And that is an initiative to ensure that all countries have access to vaccines and not just the so-called rich countries. Very proud to note that Canada is a member of this COVAX facility. There's also the WHO Solidarity Trials, and this is looking at 4 different treatment options. There are 100 countries involved in the research. Canada has an arm called CATCO. There are over 12 hospitals across Canada. Sunnybrook in Toronto is our primary sponsor, but CIHR is involved, and Remdesivir would be its first success story. And the last one I'll mention is CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. Now that actually predates the pandemic. It was launched in 2017, but its entire mandate was to reduce time to develop vaccines by up to 80%. So how prescient that was launched just before this pandemic. It's being funded by governments, and again, I'm proud to say Canada is one of those governments, and major philanthropic organizations, the BMGF, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Wellcome Trust. So very quickly, that has been my sort of key comments, I guess, on the action this industry has taken through COVID-19 and the international collaboration that's been happening. We do end up at this point, so what, now what? And that's my last comment. These are such uncertain times, and they are continuing, and perhaps we have more questions today than we even did on Friday, and that will continue as well. There are significant challenges in front of us. Delivering successful vaccines in and of itself, safe and efficaciously. We have been very conscientious of trying to cut time, but not corners, because we know there are some concerns. Making sure there's a sufficient supply of the vaccines and treatments. We've been hearing a lot about the challenge of the temperature controlled delivery systems, which I know Dr. Neem will get into. And what about uptake, the vaccine hesitancy, the misinformation that is around us, another big challenge. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that here in Canada, we don't have the most favorable regulatory regime for an industry that we're looking to invest in this country and to be front and center at a time like this. There are regulations that are going into play in a few weeks that will have a very negative impact on patient access to medicines and as well as investments in this country. And as we get into the discussion, I'm sure it will come up, this question of, is there vaccine capacity in this country? And if not, why not? And we can go into that in more detail at that point. But certainly the environment in Canada is not as inviting, shall we say, for this industry as it is in other countries, and that has a cost to pay. So I'll end on a positive note, however, opportunities. This is, after all, an innovative industry. Our members specialize in being flexible, adaptable, resilient. We are opportunity driven. Pivoting is in our DNA, you might say. I believe that our members have truly risen to the challenge of COVID-19. They're just demonstrating clearly what is and what will be required to thrive amidst an environment of uncertainty. So I'll go back to my early theme, that increased and unprecedented collaboration needs to continue. The greater ability and an ability to adapt how they work together and with governments, certainly focusing on how to scale up and move quickly, and finally how to leverage the tremendous research talent that makes Canada so attractive to these innovative companies. That's one thing that we can take, again, a great deal of pride in. So a lot of work to be done, but quite a bit that has been done. I hope some of this information has been useful, and I'm going to, at this point, thank you, merci, for your attention, and pass on to Dr. Neem.
Thanks very much, Pamela. I am going to be using slides. I'll not be TED talking as much as Pamela did. Thank you so much, Pamela. That was wonderful. It's such a great opening presentation, so I can jump in and start to show some of the things that we've been doing here around the world in order to combat COVID-19. So next slide. I might as well just go to the next slide. So when you have a pandemic, it's really important to understand the chain of infection, because the infectious agent, as you can see at the top of the slide, is new. It's completely new. It has been formed spontaneously, in a sense, through mutations of viruses, and it is spread around the world. So in regard to the chain of infection, you have to have all the elements to have an infection, but you only have to break, good news, one of the chains in order to break the chain of infection. So when we see the infectious agent and then we go clockwise, we see there's a reservoir. And in regard to SARS-CoV-2, that happened to be in bats, and then it was transmitted to humans. Then you have to have a portal of exit, you have to have a mode of transmission, and you have to have a portal of entry into the susceptible host. Now, in respiratory, it's a wee bit boring because the portal of exit is the same as the portal of entry, but it doesn't have to be. In some diseases like hepatitis A, where it's fecal oral, its portal of exit would be fecal, and then the portal of entry would be oral. But in this case, it's the same. It's the respiratory system. The mode of transport at the bottom of the slide can be basically divided into two parts. It's direct. In other words, you can sneeze or cough on someone. You actually have the droplets actually going right into the susceptible host. Or you can in fact have indirect. So for example, we all have cell phones now. So let's say, for example, we cough into our hand, we grab our cell phone, and then we do as I do. I lose my cell phone every 4 hours, and I ask my wife, Michelle, where the heck did I put my cell phone? And she grabs my cell phone. Well, now she's got the virus on her hand, and if she touches her nose or her mouth, then she'll be infected. So, but when it gets through into the respiratory system, it really depends on, and we've really found this with the SARS-CoV-2 virus giving rise to COVID-19, the susceptible host. Now, we're all in a pandemic susceptible, but clearly people that are 50 to 64 years of age who have chronic comorbidities, and certainly people 65 years of age, and at the extent of that, those people that are most frail, 65 years of age and older, in the long-term cares, are very susceptible to providing, or to getting quite sick. Now, how do we change the dynamics of the susceptible host? Well, there's two different ways. One way is basically by getting the infection and deriving antibodies, but of course there's risk there of morbidity and mortality. And the second way is actually by vaccinating. Now, I should say there's actually a third way, and that's what Pamela was talking about. That's antibodies. You can actually provide antibodies, but it's just not as popular now as the vaccine route. So that's where we'll be focusing a little bit more on vaccines today. All right, next slide. Thank you very much. So what's really important to understand about vaccines is that we are basically following an infection. We're basically following and trying to mimic an infection. So what we're doing with vaccines is we're giving some part or portion or a virus or and nowadays the messenger RNA, we're giving that to a person in order to stimulate an immune system response with memory. So when the wild virus comes along, our immune system will go, oh, I see, I recognize you, and we're going to throw some antibodies at you, some cytotoxic T cells, and we're going to kill this whole thing quickly before disease can take hold. So let's look at that for a minute, and I'll go through this fairly quickly because I don't want to be dwelling on this. Want to get to the questions and answers. But when you look at a coronavirus infection, what's happening is that you're inhaling it, as mentioned before, and it goes into your lungs and it goes down to your respiratory epithelium, and the spike protein that's on the SARS-CoV-2 virus actually attaches to an ACE2 receptor. That allows it to go through what we call an endocytotic process. In other words, it just drops its way into the cell. Now, why is it going into the cell? Why is the virus going into the cell? Because it needs to borrow our cellular machinery in order to reproduce, because viruses are so simple. So the virus is in there, it'll be attacked by lysosomes, which will break it open specifically to liberate the messenger RNA or the mRNA. And then it goes through little organelles called, you might remember from grade 7 science, the Golgi apparatus and the endoplasmic reticulum, and it reads the mRNA and it produces proteins. And those proteins then go to the cellular wall, and then an exocytotic process, that virus then leaves the cell. Now, at that point, the immune system kicks in. So the immune system sees that virus and goes, wait a minute, you're not supposed to be here. And so it has these scavengers called macrophages, and they grab the virus, and then they become antigen presenting cells. Why? Because they take a piece of that virus, usually the spike protein and SARS-CoV-2, and they actually present it. So antigen presenting cell presents the antigen to the rest of the immune system. It's actually the T4 helper cells, which do a lot of the communication. And the T4 helper cells communicate with the antigen presenting cells to B lymphocytes. B lymphocytes then produce antibodies. The helper T cell also communicates with cytotoxic T cells, and those cytotoxic T cells have an ability then to recognize infected cells with SARS-CoV-2, and they will kill those cells. The really interesting thing about this is that both the B cells and the cytotoxic T cells will produce memory cells, and therefore, in a subsequent next infection, that infection will be killed quite quickly. That's why when people say, "Can you get a virus twice?" Well, not in the same season. Can you get flu twice in the same season? Well, not essentially no, because if it's the same strain, you've produced immunity and memory to it. So with vaccines, we're just trying to do that whole thing, except we're trying to produce a vaccine which will not give disease, but will give memory. Okay, next slide. I hope that was clear because people write books on that. So I just said one slide. Okay, so the overview of vaccines. Well, when you're talking about COVID-19 and the SARS-CoV-2, I mean, there's been over 160 candidate vaccines. There's about just over 50 that are in clinical trials, and that's quite overwhelming. But you actually can divide those 160 candidate vaccines into 4 categories or 4 buckets, and they are from left to right. You have your virus vaccines, you have your nucleic acid vaccines, you have your viral vector vaccines, and you have your protein-based vaccines. Now, I'm going to just talk mainly about the last 3 because that's, as Pamela mentioned, the advanced purchase agreements the Canadian government has made have been on those last 3. But just quickly, virus vaccines are traditional vaccines. They're measles, mumps, and rubella, or the inactivated polio vaccine. These are weakened or killed. They are fairly complicated to make. And so there are some candidate vaccines that are viruses, but they're complicated to make and difficult to produce. So that's why the Canadian government kind of steered away from them. The nucleic acid vaccines are what people are talking about. And what are they? Well, they're actually taking the genetic material of the virus. In this case, it tends to be the genetic material of the spike protein of the SARS-CoV-2, and they actually have to put it into a nanolipid casing, which makes it soluble in the body. So they take the ribonucleic acid, they place, or the mRNA, which is ribonucleic acid, they place it into the lipid particle, they put it in the vaccine, and it's popped into the body. Now, it goes through the process I just talked about, but I mean, the mRNA is then in the cell, and the cell then uses its cellular machinery to produce that spike protein, and that spike protein is then liberated from the cell, and then the immune system goes through its response of macrophages, antigen-presenting cells, T4 helper cells, B cells, cytotoxic T cells, and then most importantly, memory cells. Then there's viral vector vaccines. Now, viral vector vaccines are fairly new as well, too. This actually was a technology that was used with Ebola. And so the viral vector vaccines, they take, particularly in this case of SARS-CoV-2, they take an adenovirus, which is a virus that we see a lot. It's a common cold virus. It's annoying. But they take that adenovirus and they make it non-infectious. But they also place that mRNA of the spike protein in the genetic material of that adenovirus. So that's what goes into the vial, and that's what creates the vaccine. So it's injected into the person, and then that adenovirus will go into the cell. It'll be broken up, and that mRNA will be read, producing the spike protein. And I won't go through that whole immune system response again, but that's what occurs, and the memory of that will then liberate. Generate an immune system response when the wild SARS-CoV-2 comes along. The fourth, on the right-hand side, is protein-based. And these protein-based vaccines are generally attached in this regard to an adjuvanted system. But the protein-based vaccines, they're basically saying, well, we don't have to give the whole virus. Why don't we just give what's antigenic, what's going to produce the immune, or get the immune system to produce an immunological response? And so that, in this case, is just the spike protein. So they actually have systems. In the case of Sanofi, we have a baculovirus expression system, which actually produces the proteins. And then that becomes the vaccine. An adjuvant is added. Usually, well, their adjuvants are interesting because they were the same adjuvants that were used back in 2009, GlaxoSmithKline, actually. So Sanofi's working with GlaxoSmithKline in order to have this adjuvanted product. And then there's also Medicago that's involved as well. Now, they have a little bit of a different way of doing it. They do the adjuvant as well, but they actually have a virus-like particle. And then they take the spike proteins and they pop it on the top. And you can see that farthest over to the right. The key thing about this is, once again, once you put this into the vaccine vial and you place it into people, the immune system will recognize, right? The immune system will recognize these proteins, and then the whole system will run into play. And they will have a memory, once again, a memory with immunoglobulins and with cytotoxic T cells, which will then, once the wild virus comes in, move directly at it as quickly as possible, preventing replication, preventing disease. Next slide, please. Again, very quickly done on the last slide. And once again, people do write books about that. So what we have for Q&A, so if you have any issues, you can just ask me, please. Okay, so a colleague of mine put together a comparison of vaccine candidates available for Canada. So when we're looking at the left side of the slide, what we're seeing is the companies that Pamela was talking about, where there's an advanced purchase agreement. What really is an advanced purchase agreement? Well, basically, we're asking these 7 companies, and we're saying to them, would you be able to do several things at once? So generally, when you're talking about vaccine production, you're talking about, you do your R&D, and then you do your animal studies, and then you do your phase 1s, and then phase 2s, and then phase 3s. And once you've got all that data, you put it together and you talk to the regulator. The regulator says, "Oh, that's fine. We'll license that product." And then you start manufacturing it. So it's sequential, right? But in this, time when we need to move a little bit quicker than that, we're actually doing things at the same time, or essentially at the same time. And so when you're looking at advanced purchase agreement, surely, we're still going through all the same maneuvers. Yes, we are. We're still going through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, but they're kind of stacked a little bit. So, as soon as you get to that point in the phase 1 where you're comfortable, you go into the phase 2. When you're comfortable with the phase 2 data, then you go to the phase 3. But you have the data that keeps coming out. You keep rolling it towards the regulator. So it's a rolling submission. So the regulator continues to get the information as it's being produced. But the key thing about this is that in the advanced purchase agreement is that the vaccine is being produced at the same time. Now, clearly, if the data that you're getting out of your clinical trials doesn't show it to be safe and efficacious, well, Canada's not going to purchase the vaccine. But if it is safe and efficacious, which we've been very excited about in regard to, the first three, the Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca. So we have data that's positive. It's going to go to the regulator. Most likely they will give licensure, but we have the product. It's go. It's not, oh, we've got the product, we've got the licensure, let's start making the product. No, the product's already being made. So this is how we've really sped things up. Now, there is some interesting differences, and obviously I've gone through them on the last slide in regard to mRNA. So the first two on your left there, Pfizer and Moderna, they're mRNA. The viral vector, that's AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. And then the protein subunit, that's Novavax, Medicago, and Sanofi. And in that, they've all used the spike protein. This is giving us a lot of confidence, folks, because the spike protein seems to be working really well in regard to safety, in regard to immunogenicity, in regard to efficacy. And so we expect that all of these vaccines are going to work well. Like, what could be better? Now, when you look at as you move more to the right, once again, you can see that there's these advanced purchase agreements. These are for a lot of vaccine. Now, the key thing about this, when you look at Pfizer at 20 million, Moderna at 56 million, down to Sanofi there at 72 million, Medicago at 76 million. They're not coming on, the day after, we've got a licensure. Now they're going to come in aliquots. They're going to come in aliquots. And so this is, I think, a really important point, because once the government gets the vaccines in these smaller numbers than millions upon millions upon millions, they will have, generally by the National Advisory Committee on Immunizations, they will have a at-risk group. And the people that probably should be given the vaccine first. And that's the government to decide where they're going to go with that. The National Advisory Committee has looked at two groups, particularly, of course, people that are in long-term cares, and also frontline healthcare workers or frontline people like the police and firefighters. So they've looked at those groups, but that's policy, and I'll leave that to them to decide. At the right-hand side, you can see that there are some differences now in the vaccines, fairly significant differences actually in the vaccines. So just to outline them, and it's been in the media, but when you look at the mRNA vaccines, they don't use the normal fridge. They actually need some fairly significantly low temperatures in order to be stored. But they can come out of those -70, -20, but it's for shorter periods of time. So when you look at the Pfizer, that can come out and last for about 5 days, and Moderna is about 30 days. Interestingly, the other vaccine types, whether it be the viral vector or the recombinant subunit vaccines, they actually can just be in normal fridges. So you can see that the distribution of these is going to be a little bit different, and the provinces and the federal government are going to have to look at that and see, what's going to be the best way that we can distribute those. So I think at that point, I'll leave it at that. I think it's really important that we get to questions and answers, because I gave you and Pamela gave you our information, but we'd like to answer what you guys are thinking about, you folks are thinking about. All right. So thank you very much for having listening to my presentation, and send it back to Brenda.
Perfect. Thank you. We have a few questions coming in, and this is a good time for others to submit their questions as we talk about them. So the first one, Pamela, I'll invite you to join us as well, because I believe it's targeted towards Innovation Medicines Canada. So there's a strong desire on the part of the media and political opportunism to polarize and dichotomize the issues associated with access to vaccines for COVID-19 in Canada. This is from Donald. Why does the IMC not speak out with this more sensible and responsible position of providing Canadians with access at good value? Now, this came up when you were in your opening talk, Pamela, and I'm just looking forward to hearing your answer.
Well, hi, Don. Thanks for that question. Don and I have known each other for a little while, although not recently. This is a really tricky one. First of all, anything that the industry says has a difficult time, just because of the lack of trust in the industry that has been developed over the years. So that's an issue when it comes to being able to speak out and have any great credibility. But the one thing I will add is we have been trying for just over 4 years now to work with government, 3 very specific outreach efforts to present, if you will, what we think is a very balanced approach to a number of issues of concern to the industry that are connected with the COVID-19 and vaccine issues that we're talking about today, because we don't have as vibrant an industry in this country as many other countries do. So why is that? And what can we do going forward to get into a better space? So we've been trying to work with governments, and this, we've had some meetings there. There hasn't been a great deal of openness, to be quite frank. And we did make a decision about 2 weeks ago to go to the public with what we've been talking with the government about. We tried first being very respectful, do it within government normal sort of communication chains. It wasn't effective, and so we've gone to the public. So that's a little more specific about this big discussion point that we're trying to have with government. In terms of general ongoing media, we're pretty active on all social media, trying to really talk about the value of industry. There is a campaign in the market, it's been out for about 2 months now, called Hope is Hard Work, that tries to answer the question that we provided to all the participants here right off the top. How much do you know about the industry? Well, we don't. Look, I worked in the health system my entire life, and I thought I knew a little bit about it, and I only realized how little I knew when I came here. So we're trying to get that value of the industry and do some myth busting, some fact checking, this sort of thing. But it's a hard barrier to break. So I don't know if I've answered your question exactly, Dawn, but we are doing everything we can, both with general media and social channels, but also with government to provide a more balanced response to what we're dealing with right now.
Mm-hmm. And actually, when I was preparing for this webinar, I read on your website that there's some legislation coming in January that has an impact on access to medicines. Is that right?
I mean, this is, all roads lead to PMPRB. That's the Patented Medicine Prices Review Board, which in Canada, has this great, as an average Canadian citizen, has a body that has been there since 1989, making sure that prices are not excessive. But their focus is very much on cost and trying to get the absolute lowest cost to drugs. Now, at first blush, that probably sounds great to all of us as average Canadian citizens. However, if you are too extreme in focusing on cost, then you lose in other areas. You can't have it all, basically. So these regulations that are primed to come into play will affect all of our member companies by anywhere from 20-30% of the revenue up to 80% of the revenue. Well, you can't then have an expectation that this industry is going to invest more, is going to build plants, is going to do all of these various things. The biggest issue, though, is that because of the uncertainty caused in Canada around these regulations, is that companies are holding off on launching their medicines here. So Canadians aren't getting access to the most innovative medicines that they have. And the government doesn't have a line of sight on that. So we've tried to share that with them, because I deal with companies daily. They tell me when decisions are being made because of the severe nature of these regulations. They are primed to come into play in 4 weeks. And it's because of these regulations that we've been trying to find a way to help government meet their policy objectives, have a more sustainable pricing regimen, if you will, but also be able to keep an industry investing in the country and making sure the products come here so we all can have access to them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I would say, though, on a note of positivity to the work that Pamela is doing, is that, in fact, actually, at Sanofi, we do produce vaccines, a lot of vaccines. We manufacture 60 million doses a year, and we actually distribute them to 62 different countries. And those are infant vaccines. Those are pediatric vaccines. And because of Pamela's hard work and her colleagues at IMC, actually the provinces are reaching out to us. Now they reach out to me, which is, I'm like, wait, I don't do that for a living, but I do have colleagues that do that. And so we'll be speaking to different provinces this week, in fact.
Wow, great. There's another question here from Julia. Has any work been done to find alternative delivery methods for the vaccines? For example, nasal spray, patch, oral?
So you glitched right in the middle.
Oh, sorry. So has any work been done to find alternative delivery methods for the vaccines, such as nasal spray, patch, or oral?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And now maybe not so much for SARS-CoV-2 because we're moving quickly on this one. And so we're going to go with the traditional intramuscular or subcutaneous, but mostly looks like intramuscular. But yes, absolutely. We've been looking for different routes. And in fact, we've done a number of different ones over the last decade. Intradermal, patches with microneedles, intranasal, yes, certainly have flu vaccines that do that. So we're looking at all kinds of different routes in order to get to the immune system effectively to get a good immune response. Interestingly, now it still seems like the subcutaneous and intramuscular injections, they seem to do the best for us now, but we are absolutely 100% looking at, actually there's universities. I do a lot of work with the universities. Those folks there are really, they're the thinkers in the world, and they're coming up with some really neat ideas, and I've been in communication as well as the other member companies have been in communication with them. So we should be expecting some changes soon.
Great, thank you. Another question from Ginger. Honestly, is Canada, I'm just reading exactly what it says, is Canada further behind in getting access to the COVID vaccines than other countries? How do we compare to the other key countries such as USA, United Kingdom, Australia, China, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, Pamela, should I take that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I hear so much misinformation actually about COVID-19. It's quite remarkable. Prime Minister Trudeau, as Pamela mentioned, there were over 500 million doses that he's got advanced purchase agreements on. I mean, Europe's got a number, the US has got a number quite early on. And this, again, has to do with the work that Pamela's been doing and that I've been doing and my colleagues have been doing. We spoke to the government and we told them, I mean, they kept saying, how are we going to get vaccines? Well, I mean, you can have, boots on the ground, Canadian manufacturing companies like Medicago, that helps. But also the best way to do it is actually an advanced purchase agreement. And they listened, and that's why I have advanced purchase agreements. I think that the problem is that people are kind of getting, I tried to mention this, like people are getting to this point there. Oh, good. Okay, then so we need 2 doses per person. So we need 76 million doses. Well, that's not going to happen. I mean, that's where we have to really look at the globe. We have 8 billion people in the world. We need 16 billion doses. We will get aliquots of vaccine equally. And the WHO is going to be a little bit involved in that too. And they've kind of set out some guidelines on that. So we will get them. We will get them over months period. And we will be going to the vulnerable people and the people that are most at risk. And then we will kind of work our way through this. I don't want to give timelines because I don't really know what the timelines will be, but I suspect it's not going to be, as they're saying, December or January. We're not going to get 76 million doses in December or January, but we will get them as the months progress.
And if I might just add, let's use this as lessons learned. Even though we're still in the middle of it, we can learn lessons, and let's not wait for another pandemic, another couple of decades to go by and see if and how and when we should in fact bring more domestic capacity. When the Prime Minister spoke last week and said we have no vaccine capacity in this country, there's a bit of a furor in the industry because we do, of course. I think he was a bit misinformed, and he was probably speaking specific to the COVID-19. But beyond Sanofi, which Dr. Nima has been speaking to, we have a very large GlaxoSmithKline facility outside Quebec City, which provides the majority of all flu vaccines for this country, and have been the go-to company for a vaccine in the case of a pandemic coming up. So there's a lot going on in terms of vaccine in this country, but if we want to be one of those countries that gets access first, which is what the question was about, look at the countries that have that in-house, that domestic production capacity, the broad-based. They're the ones who will get it first, and take a look at the environment that allows that to happen. That's what we need to emulate in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Dion, you mentioned misinformation, and this is a question for me, and there is so much out there. I'm wondering if you have a resource for the audience to, where should we look for the best information? I mean, I learned a lot just going through the IMC website myself this morning.
I mean, It's first of all, that question is extremely difficult. Why? Because it's a novel virus, and a lot of times we just don't have the information. And so then there's a lot of speculation and of what might happen. And this is, I think, where the misinformation starts to spawn, is that when you're speculating, make sure people realize that you're speculating. And also staying in your lane. People need to stay in their lane. I'm a medical doctor and I do vaccine research. That's my lane. Don't ask me about policy. That's what policy people do. And I think that this, unfortunately, that's what's happened, is that people have just been speculating, and the messages have got a bit well, wrong. So there are a lot of different websites that you should go to, but I think the Public Health Agency of Canada actually has a really good one. IMC obviously has a very good one as well that you've experienced. And then it's tough. I've never seen science being reported in the media before pandemic, and you're just getting tidbits. I can't even evaluate the data that's coming in the science. The efficacy is 90%, the efficacy is 95%. Well, I need to know the study. I need to see the study. What are the confidence intervals? What are the p-values? I mean, it's challenging. I mean, people want information, and we've accepted that we're going to provide it in the media without the full, rigor of them being evaluated in scientific journals. And so it's just hard. But the Public Health Agency of Canada, IMC, if you are looking for information about a specific vaccine, the member companies will have their own websites to look at, and that's where you're going to get the most information.
Okay, thank you. Pamela, do you have any suggestions?
Not to add to that, I think that, yeah, the Public Health Agency, definitely a go-to place.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that. Couple of questions. Well, Pamela responded here saying, thanks for the excellent presentations, important and timely information. Please keep the discourse alive. And I'm realizing how important this discourse is. There's a question here. Can you comment on DNA vaccines, safety, efficacy, and if this is something we may see in Canada for either COVID-19 or the near future? Also, if there's any work to socialize DNA vaccines to the general public.
Yeah, DNA vaccines and RNA vaccines, that's packaged together. It just seems that RNA vaccines seem to work a little bit better for the SARS-CoV-2. DNA are a little bit more complicated to deal with, but I mean, the major thing about them, whether you're doing DNA or RNA, is that they have to be placed in these those lipid nanoparticles, because if you just drop DNA or RNA into your system, your immune system will eat it up in a minute. But yeah, those are just two very new and very, very exciting ways of developing vaccines. So DNA will be there. People think that it's about the vaccine. It's actually not. It's about the infectious disease. What is the infectious disease doing, and what is going to be the vaccine that's going to be best to provide the immune system response? So it just depends on. In this case, it was RNA.
Thank you. Another question: Do we know for how long each of the vaccines presented will be efficient?
Well, that's more difficult when you're moving at the speed we're moving at. So that is a continued question. And so how long will they last? So basically, if you've started 3 months ago, they're going to last 3 months. They actually, phase 2s have looked at a little bit differently. They've looked at immunogenicity. So they've looked at antibody titers, and they're going to follow those along. So we're a little bit ahead on that. But this is going to be something that is a post-immunization surveillance, and there'll probably be what we call phase 4 trials, where they'll be looking very closely at that. But once again, remember, it's twofold. The infectious disease. Well, how much is our SARS-CoV-2 virus going to change? It's already changing since it left in China. It's already changed. Since it hit Italy, it's already changed. Since it's been in the US, it's already changed. So is that going to change to make the vaccine immunity provided less effective? Oh, okay, that's one thing we have to look at. And then if it does stay stable, how long are we going to go? And we'll see how that goes. I mean, when you're looking at these kinds of efficacy, and these types of titers, I suspect it will last a fairly long time, but we'll see.
Great, thank you. Question: with the urgency to get the vaccine distributed, what is industry commitment to supply chain digital infrastructure? For example, universal barcodes to manage inventory and track efficacy.
Well, that's a great, that's such a great question. So yeah, we barcode everything, and so that's just checkbox for that one. You know what? Honestly, it's not so much about what we do. We're going to do everything technologically we can, but it's a lot of it's what we're asked to do. You know, we produce the vaccine and we give the vaccine to the government. But we're, as Pamela's mentioned, like we're very happy to help. You just ask. I mean, we are experts in this area of distributing, like I mentioned before, like distributing vaccines. We know what we're doing. So I would suggest that we'd be very happy to help out in many things that you've just mentioned in your question. We have to be asked.
Mhm, mhm. I think there was talk of not following the barcoding path just for speed and efficiency. And if you say they barcode everything, would that be part of the process of distributing it anyways? Or
Yeah,
I
I
know
mean,
that poses a concern.
I should always watch myself, and this is how misinformation starts. Because yeah, we barcode everything except maybe in the pandemic we're not. So I'd have to check with, and not all companies might as well too. But it's pretty standard, obviously, to barcode. I mean, I would suspect that they would, but yeah. So apologize there. I answered one of my first questions about how misinformation starts by people saying things that I just said. So, and honestly, like that's just that's what happens. I mean, yeah.
That's true. Yeah, it's innocent. It's positive intentions, right? And yeah. There's a question here for you, Pamela. What are 2 to 3 key regulatory changes required to increase Canadian flexibility or ability to create needed medications vaccines and for us to be more competitive or comparable to other countries?
Well, how much time do we have? Let me start out by saying that this is an industry that is absolutely committed to contributing to a sustainable health system, or health systems as we have in Canada. They have a reputation for being price gouging, etc. That's not the intent. Clearly, if they don't make profits, they don't have the billions of dollars to invest at times like a pandemic. So that's the way it goes. But certainly in terms of, I mentioned 3 things that could be helpful in this environment. One is patent and data protection. Canada doesn't have as good an approach to those items as some other countries do. So that's one. Secondly, I would say just the access and the time to listing. So by that we mean once a company brings a product into Health Canada for safety checks, etc. There are just so many steps to go through that Canadians don't get access to these drugs. And I'm sorry, I don't know the exact number, but it's something like 586 days as opposed to maybe 150 or 200 in other countries. It's dramatically out of step with most other countries just getting access. So you can work that backwards. If a company only has 20 years of protection on its new innovative miracle drug, and the first 10 are taken up in development, R&D, and a very lengthy approval process to get it to market, they're left with much less time to recoup the costs that went into creating it in the first place. So my Coles Notes version. So having, looking, and even folks, by the way, they're on board, everyone's on board in Health Canada, PMPRB, we all recognize that we have a chunky, fragmented system and have to do something about it, but that needs urgent attention. And the third one is the one I've been talking about, and that's I call it a viable pricing system. What we have at the moment, partly it's dysfunctional with the pieces that I've just mentioned in the process, but as I've been talking about with the Patent Medicine Prices Review Board, that is, in our view, overextending what it really should be doing, and creating such an unfriendly environment that industry is not wanting to come here. And that's a huge problem. So those are the 3 things that I might just mention off the top.
Great, thank you. I think we'll turn to Roshni I'll ask you to pop up the questions that we had. We're going to poll the audience again.
Could I just add one more thing there, actually, before you do? Oh, well, you've
Sorry,
got it up there already. Maybe we'll go ahead and we'll do the code. I can mention
Closing comments.
Yeah.
So this first question here is, how much do you feel you've learned about the innovative medicines industry and its response to COVID-19? Hey, it's gone up. That's great. Dion, did you want to make your comments now before we put the second one up?
Sure. I'm just going to take my industry hat right off, and then I'm going to put on my pediatric hat, doctor hat, professor hat. I'm from McMaster University. So, but I mean, these are going to be controversial comments. So get ready. So we have a socialized medicine in Canada. Everyone has access to medicine. Outstanding. But in a situation when you're socialized, society has to take care of the healthcare system, and so there seems to be so much focus on Innovative Medicines Canada and and PMPRB, and as if that's the problem. It's not the problem. There's a lot of problems, and I think that we all have to take personal responsibility to have this great access to socialized medicine, whether it be, and I go across Canada talking to people about this all the time, but I mean, you have to look at primary prevention of disease. I mean, it's spending time on exercise, on nutrition, on mental health, on vaccinating. It's those types of things. It's as people accessing the healthcare system when you need to. It's and maybe not when you don't need to. It's about people like myself saying, do I really need to order that test, or are we okay here? It's hospitals setting up, good protocols that are efficient, are cost efficient as well as efficient, and then of course now we're at our medicines place, and so it's all of us together. If we want to keep this thing sustained, we all have to work together on it. So I do feel for Pamela a little bit, because I think sometimes the mud gets thrown at her a little bit too much.
If I might add one, do we have time for one rejoinder, I guess, to that, to support what Dr. Neem is saying, that we have to get to the table and have the right stakeholders there, all of them, and have this discussion. And that's the challenge that we have at the moment. This global industry has interesting, exciting solutions to a lot of the problems we're dealing with in Canada, and we just want to get to a table and talk about them, whether it's rare disease strategy, whether it's dealing with the un and underinsured. We have offered considerable money. We've got a $20 billion offer on the table to address, some of that would address commercialization, incubators, et cetera, that would deal with this type of situation we have today. But there is no interest, it appears, to have that conversation with us, regardless of what we might have an offer, to get to the table and work this out, all of us around the table. And I think that's consistent with the point that you're making, Dion.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We'll do the second question. Roshni, if you'll get, there we go. How would you rate your knowledge on COVID-19 candidate vaccines? There we go.
Oh,
good.
Excellent.
Great. Well, thank you.
For 1 hour.
My controversial comments didn't hurt my poll. Or maybe they did. I don't know.
So Pam, I really appreciate your opening comments about putting tension aside and working for the good of all Canadians. It emphasizes the approach we're witnessing in some areas that includes unparalleled collaboration and cooperation. Like, I can only hope will continue throughout the remainder of the pandemic and actually beyond, like create a new normal, to use an overused phrase, but really move past this. And reflecting, Dion, your Team Canada jersey, which I appreciate. That's it, exactly. Health leaders and college members make up a national team committed to providing better healthcare and unparalleled collaboration during this pandemic, regardless of title or profession, and they perfectly reflect Helen Keller's quote, "Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much." So it's my privilege to acknowledge everyone who took part in today's webinars, beginning with the speakers, Pamela and Dr. Neem. Thank you for sharing with us your time, experience, and expertise, knowledge, and for all you do for driving innovative medicines in Canada. Wishing you well as you ramp up into the vaccination phase of the pandemic. I know you're going to be very, very busy. On behalf of the CCHL team that includes myself, Roshni Mitchell, Amy O'Brien, thank you to all of you for your time, attendance, and commitment to lifelong learning and development. We value your engagement both in this webinar and in your daily work, and look forward to seeing you again. So thanks everyone, stay safe.
Thank you, CC.